You wake up. The day begins. But something lingers in the quiet spaces of your mind. A thought, subtle, persistent, almost like a shadow brushing against the edges of your awareness. Am I enough? You move through your morning, brushing your teeth, making coffee, checking your phone, yet the question does not leave. It sits, uninvited, but somehow familiar, like a guest who knows all your secrets without saying a word. Most of us live in this tension. We search for validation outside ourselves, in the smiles of strangers, the praise of colleagues, the fleeting approval of friends or family. And for a moment, it can feel sufficient. But deep down, there is a part of us that knows the truth. No external voice, no accumulation of achievements, no mirror reflection can give us what we truly crave. Because the foundation of every meaningful life is something often overlooked, something deceptively simple. It is not wealth, influence, or recognition. It is the ability to love yourself, and not just superficially, like a passing affirmation in front of a mirror, but fully, deliberately, with the kind of clarity and quiet conviction that does not rely on anyone else's consent. Consider this. Every relationship you have, every ambition you pursue, every challenge you face is filtered through the lens of self-perception. How you treat yourself tends to set the standard for how others treat you. If you undervalue yourself, the world often mirrors that undervaluation. If you nurture and respect yourself, you begin to operate from a place of integrity that others unconsciously recognize and respond to. Loving yourself is not narcissism. It is strategy. It is clarity. It is a fundamental discipline that anchors every decision you make. Yet, paradoxically, the world encourages the opposite. From the earliest age, we are conditioned to look outward. Be humble, they say. Put others first. And there is value in empathy, in consideration, in generosity. But without the steady anchor of self-respect and self-love, these virtues can erode you. You give endlessly to people who take. You sacrifice endlessly for systems that ignore you. You seek validation in spaces that do not exist for you. And slowly, quietly, your sense of self begins to fray. Imagine for a moment the mind of a person who has mastered this balance. They walk through life with a calm authority. Not loud, not aggressive, but unmistakable. Their decisions are grounded not in fear of judgment, but in alignment with their values and priorities. They set boundaries without guilt. They pursue goals without desperation. They communicate with honesty and clarity because they know their worth is not negotiable. This is the subtle power of self-love. It does not appear overnight. It does not arrive with a sudden revelation or a life-changing epiphany. It is built through countless small choices, repeated with discipline and awareness. It is found in the moments when you stop yourself from accepting less than you deserve. It is reinforced when you speak kindly to yourself, when you honor your limits, when you forgive mistakes without surrendering your standards. Consider the psychology behind this. The human brain is wired to seek patterns, to categorize experiences, and to respond to perceived threats or rewards. When you consistently allow external voices to define your worth, your brain encodes those experiences as reality. You begin to see yourself through lenses shaped by others' expectations, opinions, and criticisms. Over time, this can create a feedback loop. Doubt begets more doubt, self-criticism becomes habitual, and genuine self-regard fades into a faint whisper beneath the noise of external influence. Conversely, when you consciously practice self-love, you retrain those neural pathways. You begin to recognize patterns of thought that are unhelpful, and you replace them with perspectives that reinforce your value. This is not magic. It is neuroplasticity. It is the brain's remarkable capacity to adapt to new information. The moment you start treating yourself as someone worthy of care, respect, and attention, the probability increases that the world will mirror that behavior, not because you demand it, but because your presence communicates it effortlessly. But loving yourself more than anyone else requires courage. It requires looking inward honestly, confronting the parts of yourself you may have avoided, the fears, the insecurities, the moments when you did not stand up for yourself. It requires acknowledging your flaws without letting them define you, seeing your limitations without letting them confine you. It is a daily commitment to your own humanity, a recognition that you are deserving of care, attention, and respect simply because you exist. Think about the relationships you hold most dear. Often, the most meaningful connections arise not from perfection, but from authenticity. When you present yourself fully, imperfections and all, you create a space where trust can flourish. When you are anchored in self-love, you are not dependent on validation from others, and you are not afraid to express your needs or boundaries. You do not manipulate or coerce. You simply exist as a person who recognizes their own value. And this clarity is magnetic. Now take a moment to consider your habits. How often do you check your phone for approval? How often do you measure your day by likes, comments, or reactions? How often do you define your success by the standards of someone else? The answer is often more than we realize. And yet, each of these moments is an opportunity for redirection. Every time you catch yourself seeking external affirmation, you can pause, breathe, and reorient towards self-recognition. You can remind yourself, my value is inherent. My worth is not conditional. My attention belongs first to myself. This does not mean ignoring others or rejecting connection. On the contrary, loving yourself more than anyone else enhances your ability to give authentically. When you are anchored, your generosity comes from strength rather than scarcity. Your empathy comes from clarity rather than need. Your presence becomes a choice rather than a demand. People notice the difference. Opportunities respond differently. Decisions feel lighter, less reactive, more aligned. The challenge is consistency. Loving yourself is not a weekend exercise or a temporary mindset. It is a lifelong practice built through intentional reflection, disciplined thought, and deliberate action. And yet, the payoff is profound. You begin to experience the world with more calm, more confidence, more resilience. You stop bending to the pressures of comparison. You navigate conflict with clarity rather than fear. You pursue ambition with integrity rather than desperation. Here is the subtle truth that few are willing to acknowledge openly. The quality of your life often correlates directly with the quality of your relationship with yourself. Not your achievements, not your possessions, not your social standing, but the steady, unwavering way you see and honor your own existence. When that foundation is strong, everything else becomes easier. Not automatic, not effortless, but more aligned, more intentional, more authentic. So, as this audiobook begins, understand this. What you are about to explore is not a set of abstract theories. It is a framework for reshaping how you engage with your own life. It is an invitation to step into a quiet, yet powerful authority over your thoughts, your emotions, your choices. It is an encouragement to place yourself, not above others, not in isolation, but at the center of your own care, with clarity, integrity, and ethical purpose. By the end of this journey, you will not only recognize the importance of loving yourself more than anyone else, you will have begun the practice of doing so. You will learn how to honor your limits without shame, how to nurture your strengths without arrogance, how to communicate your needs without fear, and most importantly, you will understand that this is not an indulgence. It is the cornerstone of a life lived with depth, dignity, and resilience. And so, let us begin, not with judgment, not with pressure, but with calm attention, with openness, with the willingness to see yourself as worthy of the care and respect that you have so often given to others. This is the beginning of a subtle revolution, a quiet realignment of priorities that tends to ripple outward into every aspect of your life. A revolution built not on force, but on understanding, not on seeking validation, but on embracing your inherent value. Every page you hear, every word you consider, is a step toward that clarity. And as you listen, you may notice a subtle shift, a momentary pause, a recognition, a thought that did not exist before. Perhaps, for the first time in a long time, you are giving yourself permission to be seen, to be heard, to be cared for, and most importantly, to love yourself more than anyone else. The first step in learning to love yourself more than anyone else is understanding the mechanics of self-perception. Most people assume that self-love is an emotion, something that arrives spontaneously when life is good enough. But in reality, self-love is a practice. It is a combination of awareness, discipline, and deliberate mental framing. It begins with noticing how you relate to yourself, moment by moment, thought by thought. Consider your inner dialogue, the words you say to yourself in private, the quiet commentary that follows every action, often sets the tone for your entire day. For some, it is gentle and encouraging. For others, it is critical and punishing. This inner voice is not a minor detail. It is a primary architect of how you experience your life. If you constantly diminish your own worth in thought, your actions, even your posture, will tend to reflect that. Conversely, when you choose to acknowledge your value, your behavior begins to align with that recognition. The first practical step, then, is observation. Pay attention to your thoughts without judgment. Listen closely to the patterns that have formed over years, often unconsciously. Notice how often you dismiss your own ideas, how readily you compare yourself to others, how frequently you apologize for existing. This is not an exercise in self-criticism. It is the foundation for informed change. Awareness precedes transformation. Without knowing where you stand, you cannot begin to move forward. Once awareness is established, the next step is questioning. Every time a critical thought arises, pause and interrogate it. Ask yourself, is this thought serving me? Is it accurate, or is it habitual? The distinction is subtle but important. Many negative self-perceptions are not reflective of objective reality. They are echoes of past experiences, cultural expectations, or the voices of people who never truly understood your value. By questioning these thoughts, you create space for alternative interpretations. You begin to disentangle your self-worth from the judgments that have been imposed upon you. Equally important is the practice of affirmation grounded in truth. When people think of affirmations, they often imagine generic statements, "I am worthy," or "I am enough," uttered without connection. But effective self-affirmation is not about fantasy, it is about recognizing and reinforcing concrete truths. For example, instead of saying, "I am perfect," you might say, "I have the capacity to act with integrity and care, and I notice when I do." This approach reinforces behaviors and choices that align with your values, creating a cycle of positive reinforcement between thought and action. Another critical element of self-love is boundary setting. Loving yourself does not mean isolation or detachment from others. It means establishing clear limits on how you allow yourself to be treated. Boundaries are the practical expression of self-respect. They communicate, often without words, that your needs and well-being are valid. Setting a boundary can be as simple as declining a request that overextends you, or refusing to engage in conversations that drain your energy. These decisions are not acts of selfishness. They are statements of alignment with your values. Physical self-care is often underestimated in discussions of self-love, but it is essential. The way you treat your body is a direct reflection of your respect for yourself. This does not require perfection, extreme discipline, or adherence to societal standards of beauty. It simply requires consistent attention. Nourishing your body with appropriate food, rest, and movement, attending to hygiene, and listening to signals of discomfort or fatigue. When you honor your body, you reinforce the subconscious message that your existence matters, that your well-being is not negotiable. Equally, emotional self-care must be cultivated. Many people suppress or ignore emotions in pursuit of productivity, validation, or acceptance. Yet, emotions are data. They signal what your mind and body need. Learning to recognize and respond to your feelings without judgment is a crucial step in self-love. Journaling, reflection, and mindful awareness can help you process emotions constructively, rather than allowing them to accumulate unconsciously. The more adept you become at understanding your internal landscape, the more capable you are of responding with clarity rather than reactivity. Social interactions also play a subtle but significant role. Pay attention to how others make you feel and how you allow yourself to respond. When you consistently prioritize your needs last, you reinforce patterns of undervaluation. On the other hand, when you communicate honestly, assert your boundaries and honor your limits, You create an environment in which your self-respect is mirrored by external cues. Self-love does not demand dominance, it demands alignment, actions that reflect the respect and care you hold for yourself internally. Now, let's address the challenge of comparison. It is human to look at others and measure yourself against them. This instinct is deeply ingrained and often reinforced by culture, social media, and education. But comparison is rarely productive. It is a distraction from self-alignment. When you love yourself, you shift the standard. Your reference point becomes your own growth, your own principles, your own journey. This does not mean ignoring excellence or opportunity. It means evaluating life through the lens of personal alignment rather than external metrics. The probability of experiencing frustration, inadequacy, or resentment decreases when your framework is internal rather than comparative. Habits of thought are also central to cultivating self-love. Our brains are pattern recognition machines. Repeated thoughts become ingrained neural pathways. By intentionally practicing self-respecting thoughts, you gradually rewire the brain to favor perspectives that reinforce your value. This can be reinforced through visualization, reflective meditation, or deliberate planning of daily behaviors. For instance, starting each day by acknowledging a specific strength or accomplishment, even small ones, tends to orient your mind toward appreciation rather than deficit. Over time, this rewiring creates a more resilient, stable sense of self. It is equally important to examine past narratives. Many individuals carry internal stories about themselves that are decades old, often rooted in childhood experiences, societal expectations, or formative failures. These narratives can unconsciously dictate behavior, fueling self-doubt and inhibition. By consciously revisiting these stories, assessing their accuracy, and choosing which to retain or revise, you gain control over the internal script that shapes your life. This is not rewriting reality, it is reclaiming authority over interpretation. The probability of acting from a place of authenticity increases dramatically when old narratives are questioned. Self-love also thrives in the presence of deliberate accomplishment. Achieving goals aligned with your values reinforces the perception of competence and agency. Importantly, these accomplishments do not need to be monumental. Consistency matters more than scale. Completing a personal project, exercising discipline over a habit, or fulfilling a promise to yourself, even small, strengthens the internal signal that you are capable, reliable, and worthy of care. These actions create a positive feedback loop. As your actions reinforce your self-respect, your mind internalizes that respect, which encourages further aligned behavior. An often overlooked aspect of loving yourself is the capacity for forgiveness. Many people harbor internal resentment toward past mistakes, toward themselves for perceived inadequacies, toward the ways they feel they have fallen short. Forgiveness is not about excusing errors, it is about releasing the habitual judgment that keeps you locked in self-criticism. By forgiving yourself, you acknowledge your humanity, accept your current state, and create the emotional space for growth. This practice often leads to greater clarity, resilience, and calm in the face of challenges. Another subtle but powerful practice is selective engagement. The world is filled with noise, opinions, and expectations that are not relevant to your personal alignment. Choosing when to listen, when to speak, and when to disengage reinforces autonomy and preserves mental energy. Self-love thrives not in constant exposure, but in deliberate participation. The probability of maintaining a stable, confident sense of self increases when your attention is managed intentionally, directed toward that which aligns with your principles and values. Finally, the integration of these practices is essential. Loving yourself is not a series of isolated actions. It is a holistic approach to life. Thought patterns, habits, boundaries, emotional intelligence, physical care, and social interaction all intersect. Each reinforces the others. Over time, these integrated practices tend to compound, creating a stable foundation of self-respect, resilience, and psychological clarity. As you begin this work, Recognize that challenges will arise. Old patterns are persistent, and external pressures will test your commitment. Moments of doubt or regression are natural and do not indicate failure. What matters is persistence, the daily, deliberate choice to act in ways that honor your worth, the repeated commitment to respond to yourself with respect rather than criticism, the consistent practice of observation, questioning, affirmation, boundary setting, and self-care. Through this process, you begin to cultivate a presence that is unmistakable, not in volume, not in aggression, not in dominance, but in quiet authority, stability, and alignment. You will notice that when you treat yourself as worthy, the world responds differently. Opportunities become clearer, interactions become less draining, and decisions carry less doubt. Not because the world has changed, but because your internal framework has. Self-love transforms perception before it transforms circumstance. And so, the journey begins with the simplest act: attention. Paying close, disciplined attention to how you think, how you act, how you feel, and how you respond. Observing patterns without judgment, questioning thoughts without defensiveness, acting deliberately to honor yourself, even in small ways. Repeating these actions until they become habitual, until they become the foundation on which every decision, every relationship, and every aspiration rests. The path is subtle but profound.
And though it requires effort, reflection, and discipline, the returns are unmatched. You begin to operate from a place of calm clarity rather than reactive uncertainty. You act from choice rather than compulsion. You treat yourself as you would treat someone worthy of care, respect, and attention. And in doing so, you begin to love yourself more than anyone else, steadily, intentionally, ethically, and powerfully. One of the most challenging aspects of learning to love yourself is confronting the resistance that arises internally. This resistance often wears subtle disguises. It can appear as self-criticism, doubt, distraction, or even complacency. You may notice it as a quiet voice that insists, "You don't deserve this," or "You'll fail if you try." These thoughts are not truth. They are protective mechanisms, remnants of old patterns that were designed to keep you within familiar limits. Recognizing them is the first step toward shifting your internal landscape. To work with this resistance, it is essential to adopt the mindset of observation without judgment. The brain tends to interpret criticism as a threat, triggering defensive reactions. By observing your internal dialogue as data rather than fact, you can create a space between stimulus and response. This pause allows deliberate choice. You do not have to act on every thought. You do not have to internalize every negative assessment. By creating this space, you increase the likelihood of responding from alignment rather than reaction. Reframing is the next critical tool. Reframing is not about denial or forced positivity. It is about shifting perspective to create constructive interpretations. For example, if a thought arises like, "I am not as successful as others," you can reframe it as, "I am on my own path, and my progress is measured by my alignment with my values, not someone else's milestones."
This subtle shift reduces unnecessary self-judgment and refocuses attention on growth rather than comparison. Internal resistance also thrives on repetition. Habits of self-doubt are reinforced by constant rumination, allowing neural pathways to become deeply ingrained. The antidote is deliberate repetition of self-supporting patterns. This may include journaling, reflective meditation, or consciously noting moments of integrity, courage, or resilience. By repeating acknowledgement of your strengths and achievements, you gradually retrain the brain to prioritize your own worth over ingrained criticism. Another key aspect is the recognition of triggers. External stimuli, social media, news, interactions, or even past experiences can activate patterns of self-doubt. Awareness of triggers allows you to prepare for, anticipate, and navigate them with greater clarity. This is not about avoidance, it is about strategic engagement. You may choose to limit exposure, redirect attention, or mentally rehearse responses that reinforce your self-value. These small, intentional choices accumulate, gradually reshaping your internal narrative. The psychology of self-love also involves embracing discomfort. Growth often occurs in spaces that feel uncomfortable because they require you to act against old habits. For example, asserting a boundary may initially trigger guilt or fear. Speaking up for yourself in a meeting may feel risky. Choosing to prioritize rest over productivity may feel countercultural. Yet, each act of deliberate alignment strengthens your internal framework, creating more resilience and reinforcing the principle that your well-being matters. Self-love thrives in alignment with values. Take time to articulate what matters to you, not what others expect, not what society praises, but what genuinely resonates with your sense of purpose and integrity. When actions are aligned with values,
The internal dialogue becomes cooperative rather than adversarial.
the probability of experiencing self-respect and satisfaction increases when your decisions are consistent with your principles. Alignment creates clarity, and clarity creates confidence. An often overlooked strategy is cultivating curiosity about yourself. Many people approach self-reflection with judgment or shame. Instead, try approaching with curiosity. Ask questions like, why did I feel this way? What does this response indicate about my needs or priorities? What choice aligns with my values? This approach shifts the tone from criticism to understanding, allowing insight without emotional self-punishment. Curiosity encourages observation, reflection, and deliberate action, all essential for deep self-love. It is also crucial to address the stories you tell yourself about your past. Often, we carry narratives of failure, inadequacy, or limitation that influence present behavior. These narratives may have been adaptive at some point, helping you navigate difficult situations. But when left unchecked, they constrain growth. By consciously analyzing these stories, questioning their accuracy, and choosing which elements to retain or release, you reclaim authority over your self-perception. This practice tends to increase self-efficacy and emotional freedom. Learning to love yourself also involves cultivating agency over your environment. The people, routines, and spaces you engage with influence your internal state. Surrounding yourself with those who respect boundaries, reinforce positive values, and communicate honestly tends to support self-love. Similarly, designing routines that honor your well-being, sleep schedules, physical movement, focused work periods, and restorative breaks enhances the consistency of self-supporting behaviors. While external factors alone cannot create self-love, they increase the probability of maintaining it consistently.
Another essential dimension is the conscious management of expectations.
Unrealistic expectations, either for yourself or from external sources, tend to erode self-respect. By calibrating expectations to realistic, achievable standards while maintaining ambition and integrity, you reduce unnecessary frustration. Self-love involves recognizing effort, intention, and progress as markers of value, not just outcomes. This perspective fosters patience, resilience, and sustainable growth. Equally, self-love benefits from integrating mindfulness. Mindfulness cultivates presence, the capacity to observe thoughts, emotions, and sensations without becoming entangled. This awareness reduces automatic reactions, enhances emotional regulation, and reinforces intentional choices. By practicing mindfulness, you strengthen the neural pathways associated with self-reflection and self-regulation. The probability of responding to challenges with clarity and composure increases, reinforcing a stable foundation of self-respect. Practical exercises further strengthen this foundation. Begin by identifying 3 daily actions that align with self-value, small, deliberate behaviors that communicate care to yourself. Examples may include refusing a task that overextends you, expressing a preference honestly, or taking intentional time for rest or reflection. Commit to these actions consistently. Over time, these small behaviors compound, creating a measurable shift in internal perception and emotional stability. Reflection and journaling enhance the process. Capture moments of integrity, acts of courage, and instances when you honored boundaries. Document challenges and observe patterns in response. This practice reinforces awareness, tracks progress, and provides evidence of your capacity for deliberate self-care. By creating a tangible record, you strengthen the cognitive and emotional pathways that support self-love. The interplay of self-compassion and accountability is also vital.
Self-love is not indulgence, it is responsibility. When mistakes occur, respond with curiosity and corrective action rather than judgment or blame. When successes occur, acknowledge them without arrogance. This balance of accountability and compassion enhances credibility with yourself, reinforcing internal trust and reliability, core components of self-respect. It is also worth exploring the role of identity in self-love. Often, we define ourselves in ways that are externally imposed by family, peers, or culture. Learning to love yourself involves distinguishing the parts of identity that are authentically yours from those that are adopted unconsciously. This discernment increases the likelihood of aligning choices with intrinsic values rather than external pressures. The clearer your understanding of self, the more consistent your self-love becomes. A subtle but powerful practice is the deliberate use of language. The words you use to describe yourself influence cognition and emotion. Replace phrases that diminish with language that acknowledges agency, competence, and care. Instead of saying, "I failed," you might say, "This attempt provides data for improvement." Instead of, "I am not enough," consider, "I am capable of growth and learning." Small shifts in language tend to shift perception over time, reinforcing patterns of constructive self-assessment. Gratitude, when applied internally, supports self-love. While gratitude is often directed outward, acknowledging aspects of your own character, choices, and effort cultivates appreciation for self. Recognizing your resilience, discipline, creativity, and integrity reinforces the internal narrative that you are worthy of care and respect. Internal gratitude increases emotional regulation and reduces the need for external validation. Finally, patience is essential. Deep, consistent self-love does not develop overnight. Old habits, patterns, and narratives are persistent, often resurfacing when least expected. Recognizing that growth is iterative rather than linear prevents self-judgment. Moments of regression are opportunities for reflection, recommitment, and refinement. Consistent practice increases the likelihood that self-love becomes durable, integrated, and resilient in the face of life's complexities. By combining these approaches, observation, questioning, reframing, boundary setting, emotional and physical care, selective engagement, reflection, mindfulness, language awareness, and patience, you cultivate a robust internal framework, one that communicates worth, values integrity, and increases alignment between thought, action, and emotion. The probability of experiencing life from a place of calm authority, clarity, and self-respect grows steadily. And as you begin to inhabit this framework, subtle changes emerge. Decisions feel lighter because they are grounded in principle rather than fear. Interactions feel more authentic because you are not seeking approval. Challenges feel manageable because internal stability provides perspective. Ambitions are pursued with clarity rather than desperation. This is the practical, psychological effect of learning to love yourself more than anyone else. Remember, this is not an endpoint. It is a lifelong practice, a deliberate, iterative process that requires attention, discipline, and ethical commitment. The reward is not only improved internal experience, but a strengthened ability to engage ethically and powerfully with the world. Your presence becomes anchored in value, integrity, and deliberate alignment. And in this alignment, you discover that self-love is not an indulgence, not a luxury, but the foundation of meaningful life, consistent decision-making, and authentic connection. As you continue to cultivate self-love, one of the most persistent challenges comes not from within, but from the environment around you. The world is filled with subtle pressures, expectations, comparisons, cultural norms that can quietly erode self-respect if left unexamined. Understanding these pressures is essential
because the process of loving yourself more than anyone else requires both internal discipline and external discernment. From early childhood, most individuals are conditioned to seek validation outside themselves. Praise, recognition, and approval become benchmarks for self-worth. In school, you are rewarded for performance relative to peers. In social settings, attention and acceptance are tied to behavior, appearance, or status. As adults, this conditioning persists in subtler forms. Social media likes, professional accolades, compliments, and even criticism continue to signal whether you measure up. Over time, this external orientation can overshadow internal self-assessment, creating a cycle in which self-value is contingent on others' responses. The first step in counteracting these pressures is awareness. Notice where your sense of self is dependent on external signals. Ask yourself, which decisions am I making to satisfy others? Which actions reflect my values, and which are performed for approval? This process is not about judgment, it is about clarity. By identifying patterns of external dependence, you create opportunities to recalibrate priorities and reclaim authority over your own perception of worth. Social comparison is one of the most pervasive forms of external pressure. It is human to look at others and assess your own progress, appearance, or success relative to them. Yet this comparison is often misleading. External markers rarely reflect the internal experience or struggles of others. Moreover, comparison creates a shifting standard. What feels sufficient today may feel inadequate tomorrow as someone else's life changes. Self-love requires shifting the reference point inward, measuring growth, satisfaction, and integrity against your own standards, rather than the fluctuating metrics of others.
Setting boundaries is the practical tool for managing external pressures. Boundaries are statements of self-respect, communicated both internally and externally. They clarify what you are willing to accept and what you are not. Boundaries do not require aggression, they require consistency. By defining and enforcing these limits, you protect your mental space, reinforce self-value, and create a framework in which your internal authority is prioritized over external expectation. Cultural and societal conditioning also subtly shapes self-perception. Messages about success, beauty, intelligence, and worth are embedded in media, education, and interpersonal interactions. Many of these messages are unconscious, yet they influence behavior and thought patterns. To strengthen self-love, it is essential to critically examine these narratives. Ask, which standards reflect my values? Which are imposed externally? This discernment increases autonomy and reduces the probability that external conditioning dictates self-worth. Another critical aspect is selective exposure. The environments, media, and relationships you engage with have a disproportionate impact on internal perception. Consistently consuming content that undermines your self-respect through idealized comparisons, criticism, or negativity tends to reinforce doubt. Conversely, curating input that reflects integrity, competence, and alignment with your values tends to reinforce self-love. This is not about isolation or avoidance. It is about deliberate engagement, choosing influence rather than passive absorption. External pressures can also manifest through interpersonal dynamics. Family expectations, peer judgment, and professional hierarchies may implicitly demand compliance or conformity. Responding with self-love requires strategic clarity. This does not mean confrontation or conflict for its own sake. It means evaluating interactions and determining how to engage in ways that respect your values while maintaining ethical relationships. Over time, consistent alignment reinforces internal authority and reduces susceptibility to manipulation or undue influence. Social rituals and norms also influence self-perception. Conformity often comes with subtle costs: diminished autonomy, suppressed expression, and reliance on external validation. Observing these norms without reflexive adoption creates freedom. You may participate selectively based on alignment with values rather than default compliance. This deliberate approach enhances the probability
that your actions reflect self-respect rather than external pressure. At the same time, it is important to navigate criticism constructively. External feedback can be valuable when aligned with your objectives and ethics, but it can also become a source of doubt or self-judgment. Approach criticism with discernment. Separate actionable insights from opinion or projection. Internalize guidance that supports growth and release judgments that undermine your sense of worth. This balance strengthens resilience and reinforces ethical self-alignment. Another layer of challenge comes from social comparison amplified by technology. Constant exposure to curated lives through social media, news, or professional networks can distort perception. It is natural to notice differences, but unexamined comparison tends to reduce self-value. Implement strategies to mitigate these effects. Limit exposure, practice reflection, and anchor self-assessment in personal metrics rather than external display. This intentional management of attention reinforces the practice of self-love in a highly stimulating environment. Practical reinforcement of self-value also involves habit formation. Actions, repeated consistently, communicate respect to yourself more effectively than abstract thought alone. Begin by identifying daily behaviors that reflect alignment with your values. This may include expressing preferences honestly, adhering to personal routines, or intentionally choosing rest and reflection. Consistency builds credibility with yourself, increasing confidence and reinforcing the internal narrative of worth. Reflection is a complementary tool. Regularly reviewing interactions, decisions, and emotional responses allows you to assess alignment. Where did external pressures influence choices? Where did you respond with clarity and integrity? Journaling or deliberate contemplation creates a record of practice, highlighting patterns, progress, and opportunities for refinement. Reflection increases self-awareness, which directly supports sustained self-love. Self-respect also requires conscious management of obligations. External demands, family, work, community, often compete with internal priorities. Ethical navigation involves evaluating commitments and making deliberate choices that honor both responsibility and personal well-being. Saying no to certain requests is not selfish. It is a statement of alignment with your own values. Over time, this practice communicates stability and clarity internally and externally. Emotional regulation is another pillar. External pressures can trigger stress, anxiety, or reactive behavior. Strengthening self-love involves developing capacity to observe emotional responses, manage triggers, and respond from intentionality rather than reflex. Techniques such as mindful breathing, reflective pause, and cognitive reframing reduce reactivity and reinforce internal authority. Emotional mastery enhances the probability of making decisions consistent with self-respect, even in challenging circumstances. It is also essential to acknowledge social accountability without surrendering autonomy. Relationships, teams, and communities require negotiation between personal values and collective expectations. Practicing self-love does not mean disregarding others. It means engaging from a position of clarity, integrity, and deliberate choice. This balance tends to foster respect rather than conflict and strengthens trust both internally and externally. External pressures often exploit inconsistencies. When internal authority is weak, others may unintentionally or deliberately influence choices. The remedy is layered: consistent boundary setting, deliberate attention to internal dialogue, reinforcement of personal standards, and ethical engagement with external demands. Over time, this cumulative practice strengthens resilience, reinforces self-value, and reduces susceptibility to undue influence. Cultural myths about self-sacrifice and obligation can undermine self-love. While generosity and empathy are virtues, they must be balanced with internal alignment. Giving from scarcity, when personal needs are neglected, erodes respect, drains energy, and diminishes emotional stability. Giving from alignment, when your well-being is intact, reinforces integrity and authenticity. Self-love creates the conditions for sustainable, meaningful contribution without self-diminishment. Another subtle factor is the management of expectations, both internal and external. Unrealistic ideals imposed by society or personal ambition can create chronic dissatisfaction. Self-love involves calibrating expectations with realistic standards while maintaining growth orientation. Recognizing effort, intention, and progress as markers of worth reduces the probability of internal erosion due to unachievable demands. Integration of these practices forms a protective framework. Awareness, boundary setting, selective engagement, reflection, emotional regulation, and expectation management converge to reinforce self-respect. Over time, these habits create stability, clarity, and alignment, increasing the likelihood that external pressures have minimal disruptive effect on internal valuation. Finally,
Self-love in the face of social conditioning requires patience. Cultural patterns, social expectations, and external influence are persistent and pervasive. Progress is iterative. Regression is natural. What matters is consistent, deliberate practice, observing, reflecting, aligning, and reinforcing internal authority. With time, this deliberate approach creates durable self-respect, ethical clarity, and resilience in navigating a complex social environment. Through these strategies, you begin to embody a presence that is calm yet unmistakably authoritative, not by force, not by aggression, but through clarity, alignment, and consistent self-respect. Decisions are informed rather than reactive. Interactions are authentic rather than performative. Goals are pursued with intentionality rather than desperation. This is the practical result of ethical self-love, reinforced against social pressures, cultural conditioning, and comparison. And as you integrate these practices, a subtle shift occurs. External noise becomes less disruptive. Approval becomes supplementary rather than determinative. Confidence and clarity grow naturally. The internal narrative of worth becomes self-sustaining, anchored in deliberate reflection, ethical alignment, and personal integrity. You begin to live from a foundation that is not contingent on the world's judgment, but rooted in the steady, deliberate cultivation of self-respect. In this way, self-love does not exist in isolation. It informs every choice, strengthens every interaction, and underpins every decision. It is both shield and compass, guiding action while protecting mental and emotional integrity. The probability of sustained clarity, resilience, and ethical engagement increases as self-love becomes habitual, deliberate, and integrated with daily life. Ultimately, the practice of loving yourself more than anyone else is not a withdrawal from the world. It is an ethical engagement with life from a position of strength, clarity, and authenticity. By observing, questioning, and aligning with your values, you reduce susceptibility to external pressures, reinforce internal authority, and cultivate a life experience that is both grounded and expansive. This is the nuanced power of self-love, a subtle, enduring, and transformative force that shapes perception, behavior, and emotional stability. Self-love is not only a mindset, it is a way of life. It is cultivated through repeated, deliberate actions that reinforce your value and align your habits with your principles. The most effective form of self-love is habitual, integrated seamlessly into your daily routines so that it becomes both natural and resilient. This section explores the practical steps and thought frameworks that make self-love consistent, grounded, and actionable. Begin with your morning. The way you start your day establishes a tone that tends to ripple throughout hours, influencing both thought and behavior. Simple, intentional practices can anchor self-respect. Consider starting with a brief period of reflection. Notice how you feel, acknowledge your intentions for the day, and identify one action that honors your value. This is not a moment for rigid perfection or forced positivity. It is a deliberate pause to align your attention with your priorities. Physical preparation is also essential.
Nourishing your body with adequate sleep, mindful movement, and appropriate nutrition is a statement of respect for your existence. Physical self-care signals internally that your needs are valid and non-negotiable. Even small actions, hydrating deliberately, stretching muscles, or walking mindfully, communicate to yourself that your well-being matters. Over time, these actions reinforce a neural pattern of attentiveness and care that supports both confidence and emotional regulation. Thought patterns must be curated deliberately. Start by observing recurring internal narratives, the ways you criticize, doubt, or undervalue yourself.
Each thought is an opportunity. Ask, does this thought serve my alignment? Does it reflect my values or old conditioning? Thoughts that are unhelpful can be acknowledged without acceptance, creating a space for deliberate reframing. For instance, replace, "I shouldn't make mistakes," with, "Mistakes are opportunities to learn and refine my approach." This simple shift reduces internal friction and strengthens self-respect. Journaling is another practical routine. Capture observations, reflections, and affirmations. Document moments when you acted with integrity, upheld a boundary, or made a choice aligned with your values. Recording these experiences creates tangible evidence of self-respect in action, which reinforces internal authority and provides clarity during moments of doubt. Journaling also fosters insight. Repeated patterns of growth and misalignment become visible, providing direction for improvement. Intentional breaks and restorative periods are critical. In a world that glorifies constant productivity, taking time for rest is a profound act of self-love. These pauses allow your mind to integrate experiences, reduce stress, and maintain clarity. Reflection during breaks strengthens emotional regulation and increases the likelihood of responding to challenges with composure rather than reactivity. Rest is not indulgence. It is a practical reinforcement of self-value. Boundary practice should be integrated consistently into daily life. Begin by identifying one area where your limits have been unclear or easily compromised. This could be work, social interaction, or personal commitments. Practice articulating and enforcing that boundary with clarity and respect. Small, deliberate acts of boundary reinforcement strengthen internal trust and reduce the probability of compromise due to external pressure. Over time, these practices cultivate a stable, ethical self-authority. Mindful communication is another cornerstone. How you express your thoughts, desires, and limitations matters. Speaking with clarity, honesty, and respect strengthens self-respect internally and signals reliability externally. Avoid over-apologizing or diminishing your voice unnecessarily. When communication reflects alignment with values, interactions become less draining and more authentic. This practice reduces dependence on external validation and enhances the internal sense of worth. Visualization can be a powerful tool in daily self-love practice. Take a few minutes to imagine yourself responding to challenges with composure, setting boundaries effectively, or making decisions aligned with your principles. Visualization reinforces neural pathways, enhancing the probability that real-life actions will reflect these capabilities. Over time, repeated mental rehearsal strengthens confidence, clarity, and ethical decision-making. Gratitude directed internally is often overlooked. Most people focus gratitude outwardly, acknowledging others or circumstances, but internal gratitude reinforces self-value. Recognize your resilience, integrity, competence, and effort. Appreciating your own progress, persistence, and capacity strengthens the internal narrative that you are worthy of care, attention, and respect. Internal gratitude also reduces reliance on external approval for emotional validation. Daily reflection on decisions enhances alignment. Consider the choices you made during the day. Were they consistent with your values? Did they honor your limits? Did they reinforce self-respect? This process is not about perfection. It is about awareness and refinement. By examining actions in relation to principles, you cultivate a feedback loop that strengthens ethical consistency
and reinforces internal authority. Habit formation can be reinforced through small, deliberate routines. Choose 3 behaviors that consistently communicate self-love. For example, dedicating time to a creative pursuit, honoring a commitment to rest, or practicing mindful communication. Repeat these behaviors daily. Small, consistent actions compound over time, producing measurable shifts in self-perception and reinforcing alignment with personal values. Emotional regulation exercises can be integrated seamlessly. Simple practices, such as pausing before responding, labeling emotions objectively, and reframing challenges as opportunities for learning, cultivate stability. When emotional responses are measured and deliberate, internal authority is reinforced. This practice reduces susceptibility to external pressure, strengthens clarity, and supports consistent self-respect. Accountability is also important. Track commitments to yourself, whether they relate to health, boundaries, personal growth, or reflection. Follow-through reinforces credibility internally. Your own word to yourself becomes reliable. Internal trust is foundational to self-love because it provides a stable sense of integrity, increasing the probability that your self-perception remains anchored even when external circumstances fluctuate. Selective engagement should guide daily interactions. Not every conversation, task, or social ritual requires equal attention. Choosing where to invest energy is an act of self-respect. Engage where alignment is possible. Disengage where influence undermines clarity or self-value. This deliberate curation of attention protects mental space and reinforces internal authority, strengthening the stability of self-love across varying contexts. Physical movement is another avenue to embed self-love. Movement is not only health-promoting, it communicates to your mind that your body is worthy of care. Whether through structured exercise, mindful walking, stretching, or breathing practices, consistent attention to physical well-being enhances energy, resilience, and confidence. Movement also provides a tangible, measurable expression of respect for your own existence. Another effective practice is intentional learning and skill development. Investing time in personal growth, whether professional, creative, or cognitive, reinforces agency and competence. By developing skills that reflect your priorities, you cultivate a sense of progress, mastery, and self-efficacy. This supports internal authority, reinforces ethical engagement with challenges, and strengthens the foundation of self-love. Reflection on values should occur at least once daily. Ask yourself, did I act in alignment with my principles? Did I honor my needs? Did I maintain integrity? Use these reflections not as self-criticism, but as constructive assessment. Over time, regular evaluation clarifies priorities, strengthens alignment, and increases probability of consistently acting from a place of self-respect. Evenings provide an opportunity to consolidate practice. Consider a brief reflection period before sleep. Review the day's decisions, acknowledge successes, and note opportunities for growth. Sleep is not only restorative physically, it is a period where the mind integrates experiences. Ending the day with conscious alignment reinforces internal authority and solidifies neural pathways associated with self-respect. Small rituals amplify resilience. Whether it is a morning reflection, a midday pause, or an evening journaling practice, consistent rituals anchor self-love into the rhythm of life. Repetition is critical. Neural pathways strengthen through habitual engagement, reducing susceptibility to distraction, doubt, or external influence. Ritualized practice transforms abstract principles into lived, habitual experience. Language awareness remains central. Observe how you describe yourself internally and externally. Replace diminishing phrases with accurate, constructive statements. Reinforce competence, integrity, and value. Over time, linguistic adjustments recalibrate perception, enhance self-respect, and reduce reliance on external validation for confidence. Integration of all these elements, reflection, journaling, boundary enforcement, selective engagement, mindfulness, gratitude, visualization, physical care, skill development, and language awareness, creates a daily ecosystem that supports self-love. This ecosystem increases probability that each day's choices reinforce your internal authority, clarity, and ethical alignment. It is important to note that self-love is iterative. Daily practice strengthens neural patterns and stabilizes emotional response, but old habits and external pressures will occasionally challenge progress. Approach these moments with curiosity and constructive adjustment rather than judgment. Iterative practice increases resilience, deepens insight, and reinforces the durability of self-respect. Over time, these daily routines create a self-sustaining foundation. Decisions become deliberate, interactions become authentic, challenges are approached with clarity, and personal growth accelerates. The probability that you maintain ethical alignment and internal authority increases dramatically. Self-love ceases to be abstract. It becomes practical, measurable, and resilient, a lived experience integrated seamlessly into the rhythm of life. Ultimately, the habit of self-love is the continuous practice of observation, alignment, and reinforcement. It is the deliberate orchestration of thought, behavior, and environment in ways that honor your value and ethical integrity. The more consistently these practices are applied, the more durable self-respect becomes, creating a foundation for calm authority, ethical decision-making, and authentic engagement with life. And so, as these routines are internalized, you begin to operate from a place of clarity and presence. Each choice, each boundary, each reflection is a reinforcement of worth. Self-love becomes habitual, resilient, and integrated, a quiet, steady force that underpins every interaction, decision, and aspiration. Through deliberate, daily practice, you begin to love yourself more than anyone else. Not through force, not through ego, but through disciplined, ethical, and consistent care. Even with the strongest routines, deepest reflections, and most deliberate alignment, life will inevitably introduce pressure. Challenges, failures, and unforeseen circumstances test your commitment to self-love. This is where resilience becomes essential. The ability to maintain your sense of worth, clarity, and integrity in the face of stress. Emotional resilience is not innate. It is cultivated through practice, reflection, and deliberate action. The first step in developing resilience is understanding that setbacks are not a reflection of value. External events, lost opportunities, criticism, or unexpected outcomes do not diminish your inherent worth. The mind often interprets failure as personal inadequacy, but this is a cognitive distortion. By separating event from self-perception, you protect your internal narrative from external volatility. This distinction increases the probability that challenges will be met with clarity rather than erosion of self-respect. Awareness of emotional patterns is critical. Notice how you respond when a setback occurs. Does frustration escalate into self-criticism? Does doubt overshadow deliberate choice? Observation allows you to interrupt automatic responses. A simple pause, a conscious breath, a moment of reflection creates space for deliberate, aligned action. Over time, these micro-practices condition the mind to respond with composure rather than reaction, reinforcing self-love even under pressure. Reframing setbacks is another essential tool. Rather than viewing difficulty as a defeat, consider it as feedback, information about your approach, environment, or behavior. For example, a failed project can be reframed as data for improvement. What can I learn from this experience? How does this inform my next step? This approach transforms challenges into opportunities for growth, strengthening internal authority and increasing the likelihood of constructive response. Self-compassion plays a pivotal role in resilience. Many individuals respond to failure with harsh judgment, which compounds stress and reduces clarity. Self-compassion is not indulgence, it is acknowledgement of humanity and imperfection. By recognizing that errors and setbacks are part of the process, you create emotional space for recovery and ethical, deliberate adjustment. Compassion stabilizes internal equilibrium, supporting sustained self-love even when external circumstances are difficult. Emotional regulation techniques strengthen resilience further. Mindfulness practices, labeling emotions without judgment, and cognitive reframing help manage intensity and prevent escalation into harmful patterns. For instance, when anxiety or frustration arises, observing it as transient rather than permanent reduces the probability of reactive behavior. Over time, these practices cultivate a steady internal baseline, allowing self-respect to persist under pressure. Resilience is also reinforced through preparation. Anticipating challenges and mentally rehearsing responses increases confidence and reduces the probability of being overwhelmed. Visualization exercises, imagining scenarios where your boundaries are tested, criticism arises, or goals encounter obstacles, strengthen neural pathways associated with deliberate, aligned action. When real challenges occur, the mind is primed to respond with clarity rather than panic. Support systems enhance resilience without creating dependency. Engaging with individuals who provide honest feedback, ethical encouragement, and aligned influence reinforces internal authority while offering perspective. Support is not a substitute for self-love.
It amplifies your capacity to maintain self-respect when navigating external pressures. Choosing relationships that reflect integrity and respect increases the probability that you can sustain emotional equilibrium. Reflection after setbacks is equally important. Consider, what patterns contributed to this outcome? How did I respond? Did I maintain alignment with my values? Reflection is not self-criticism. It is constructive assessment. By analyzing response and outcome, you extract actionable insight, which strengthens both competence and internal authority. This ongoing practice enhances resilience, making future challenges less destabilizing. Routine practices established in earlier sections act as stabilizers during pressure. Boundaries, journaling, mindful communication, and daily reflection provide structural support. When external events threaten emotional equilibrium, these habits act as anchors, ensuring that self-love remains consistent. Resilience is less about avoiding stress and more about sustaining alignment through disciplined, ethical practice. Setbacks often trigger comparisons and doubt. It is natural to notice others' successes while experiencing personal challenges. However, comparison tends to amplify negative perception rather than provide clarity. Reinforce internal standards. Measure progress by alignment, effort, and ethical consistency, not by fluctuating external benchmarks. This perspective reduces vulnerability to external pressure and reinforces the foundation of self-respect. Strategic response to pressure involves deliberate prioritization. Not all challenges demand equal energy. Distinguish between what is actionable, what is instructive, and what is beyond immediate control. Focus attention on areas where deliberate action increases probability of positive outcome. This selective engagement preserves mental energy and maintains clarity under pressure, reinforcing self-love in the process. Resilience also grows from a long-term perspective. Momentary setbacks are rarely definitive. Viewing challenges within a broader timeline reduces emotional intensity and contextualizes experience. By understanding that effort, growth, and alignment accumulate over time, temporary adversity loses disproportionate influence over internal self-perception. This long-term lens stabilizes confidence and supports ethical, deliberate action. Physical well-being remains integral to emotional resilience. Stress amplifies the body's demands. Sleep, nutrition, movement, and restorative practices strengthen both physical and cognitive capacity to manage pressure. Attending to these needs reinforces self-respect and increases probability of maintaining clarity and composure under stress. Physical care is an ethical commitment to self that supports psychological stability. Routine reinforcement of values under pressure ensures alignment. When circumstances threaten to compel compromise, such as overcommitment, external expectation, or emotional fatigue, actively recalling principles and long-term objectives reinforces consistency. This practice strengthens internal authority
and reduces susceptibility to reactionary decisions. Ethical self-love thrives when action reflects principle rather than convenience or fear. Visualization of recovery can also reinforce resilience. Mentally rehearsing responses to hypothetical challenges, maintaining composure, enforcing boundaries, and acting ethically creates confidence. These rehearsals reinforce neural pathways associated with deliberate action, increasing likelihood of aligned response in real scenarios. Over time, visualization becomes a preparatory tool that stabilizes self-love under pressure. Language remains a subtle but powerful tool. Self-talk during stress influences both perception and action. Replace diminishing language, "I can't handle this," with constructive alternatives, "I can navigate this challenge deliberately," maintaining alignment and integrity. Small linguistic shifts reduce internal friction, maintain clarity, and reinforce self-respect. Repetition over time solidifies these patterns, creating durable resilience. Accountability to yourself strengthens resilience further. When mistakes occur under pressure, respond with reflection and constructive adjustment rather than judgment. When successes occur, acknowledge effort and integrity rather than relying on external validation. This balance of self-accountability and ethical self-compassion reinforces credibility with yourself, stabilizing internal narrative even in challenging circumstances. Selective disengagement can be necessary during acute pressure. Not every confrontation, obligation, or expectation warrants immediate attention. Withdrawing temporarily from non-essential demands protects mental and emotional resources. This practice is not avoidance. It is deliberate prioritization that ensures alignment and sustains self-respect. Over time, mastery of selective engagement strengthens confidence and clarity under pressure. Integration of these resilience practices ensures that self-love is not contingent on circumstance. By combining observation, reframing, mindfulness, physical care, value reinforcement, selective engagement, reflection, and constructive language, you create a framework that sustains ethical self-respect in the face of adversity. The probability of maintaining composure, clarity, and alignment increases significantly when these tools are applied consistently. Finally, understand that resilience is iterative. Challenges will test both skill and mindset. Responses will vary in effectiveness. Moments of doubt are natural. What matters is consistent, deliberate recommitment to principles and practices that honor self-value. Each recovery, reflection, and realignment strengthens neural and emotional pathways, producing cumulative growth and durable self-love. Over time, practicing resilience under pressure transforms not only how you respond to adversity, but how you perceive your own capacity. Confidence, clarity, and self-respect deepen. External challenges lose disproportionate power. Decisions are made with ethical integrity, interactions maintain authenticity, and life experiences are approached with composure and intentionality. Emotional resilience becomes both the outcome and reinforcement of ethical self-love. And so, through deliberate practice, reflection, and alignment, you learn to navigate life's pressures while maintaining internal authority. Each setback becomes an opportunity for insight. Each challenge becomes a test of alignment rather than a threat to self-worth. In this way, self-love strengthens, not in isolation, but through lived experience, ethical engagement, and deliberate, consistent action. By the time you have cultivated reflection, discipline, resilience, and alignment, you begin to approach mastery of self-love. Mastery does not imply perfection, nor does it suggest a static state. It is a dynamic integration of awareness, choice, and action, where self-respect is woven into identity and daily living. The transition from practice to mastery occurs when self-love becomes less a conscious effort and more a foundational lens through which all life experiences are interpreted. Integration into identity is the critical step in this process. When self-love becomes a core aspect of who you are, decisions, interactions, and ambitions naturally align with your principles. External validation becomes supplementary, not determinative. Comparison loses its potency because your internal measure of value is established. Each action is filtered through the lens of integrity and alignment, creating consistency between thought, emotion, and behavior. The probability of maintaining self-respect across situations increases dramatically when identity itself reinforces it.
This integration requires continuous reinforcement. Even after years of practice, old patterns may resurface under stress or temptation. Recognizing this is not a sign of failure. It is a reminder that mastery is iterative. Through consistent attention, reflection, and deliberate alignment, you can recalibrate, ensuring that identity remains anchored in ethical self-love rather than external circumstance or internal lapse. Mastery is not rigid. It is resilient, adaptive, and self-sustaining. An essential component of sustained self-love is ongoing self-reflection. Even at advanced stages, examining your motivations, choices, and interactions maintains clarity. Ask, are my actions reflecting my principles? Am I honoring my boundaries? Am I nurturing my growth and integrity? These questions are not for judgment, but for calibration. Reflection ensures that identity remains aligned with values, reinforcing ethical self-respect across the lifespan. Resilience continues to play a vital role. Life will never cease presenting challenges, pressures, or setbacks. Mastery of self-love does not eliminate difficulty. It equips you to navigate adversity while maintaining internal authority. Emotional regulation, selective engagement, reframing, and boundary enforcement, practices you have cultivated, become second nature. When stress arises, the probability that your response is deliberate, aligned, and value-driven is significantly higher than for someone who has not integrated these practices. Sustaining self-love also requires adaptive prioritization. Life changes, responsibilities shift, and circumstances evolve. Mastery involves the capacity to recalibrate routines, boundaries, and priorities in alignment with these changes while maintaining core principles. It is not static, it is responsive. This flexibility ensures that self-love remains consistent, even when external factors demand adjustment. The probability of long-term integration increases when adaptation is deliberate rather than reactive. Integration into identity is reinforced by consistent practice. Daily routines, reflection, journaling, boundary reinforcement, selective engagement, mindfulness, physical care remain anchors. Even when automatic, these routines provide structural support that maintains alignment. Mastery is less about conscious effort and more about the habitual orchestration of thought, behavior, and environment that continuously reinforces self-respect. Language continues to shape internal perception. Mastery involves internal dialogue that reflects agency, integrity, and constructive self-assessment. Constructive phrasing, I am capable of navigating this challenge, or I act in alignment with my principles, strengthens neural pathways associated with ethical decision-making and deliberate action. Repetition over time embeds these patterns deeply, creating a durable, automatic foundation of self-love. Another pillar of lifelong self-love is ethical agency in relationships. Mastery is not self-centeredness. It is the ability to engage authentically while maintaining internal authority. Relationships are approached with clarity, integrity, and respect for both self and others. By interacting from alignment rather than neediness or external validation, you create reciprocity that reinforces self-respect, reduces conflict, and fosters authentic connection. The probability of ethical, mutually reinforcing engagement increases when self-love is integrated into identity. Self-love at mastery also involves conscious engagement with challenges and opportunities. You no longer avoid difficulty, nor do you seek external validation to define success. Challenges are approached with strategic clarity, curiosity, and resilience. Opportunities are pursued based on alignment with values rather than social expectation or comparative desire. This orientation strengthens internal authority and supports sustained ethical self-respect in all endeavors. Reflection on progress remains essential. Even after years of practice, Periodic evaluation of growth, alignment, and integration ensures that self-love remains robust. Examine patterns, successes, and areas for refinement. This reflective practice, integrated into a lifelong routine, ensures that internal authority and ethical self-respect continue to deepen rather than stagnate. Mastery is maintained not through complacency, but through deliberate, ongoing attention. Visualization and mental rehearsal remain valuable. Imagine yourself navigating challenges, making decisions aligned with values, and responding with composure. Visualization strengthens neural patterns associated with deliberate, aligned action, reinforcing identity-based self-love. Even at advanced stages, rehearsal enhances resilience and reduces the probability of reactive, misaligned responses under pressure. Gratitude continues to support integration. While often directed outward, internal gratitude, acknowledgement of personal growth, resilience, and ethical decision-making reinforces identity and consolidates internal authority. Recognizing consistent effort, deliberate action, and alignment with principles strengthens the internal narrative of worth and ethical self-respect. Self-love at mastery also encompasses self-reinforcement through accomplishments, growth, and learning. By intentionally noting moments of integrity, courage, or deliberate alignment, you provide evidence to yourself of competence and worth. This reinforcement is ethical, realistic, and grounded in observation rather than external validation. The cumulative effect strengthens the foundation of identity-based self-love. Mastery involves the deliberate navigation of external pressures. Cultural norms, social expectations, and unforeseen circumstances will continue to arise. Ethical self-love equips you to engage selectively, maintain boundaries, and act in alignment without compromise of integrity. External challenges are no longer threats to self-perception. They are opportunities to exercise agency, maintain composure, and reinforce alignment with values. Life integration is also a function of sustaining routines that support self-respect. Consistent engagement with reflection, journaling, physical care, mindfulness, boundary reinforcement, and selective attention ensures that self-love remains operative even under fluctuating circumstances. These structures create a resilient framework in which identity-based self-respect is both habitual and enduring. Long-term mastery requires iterative adjustment. As life evolves, relationships change, responsibilities expand, ambitions shift. Practices must adapt while preserving principles. Ethical self-love is dynamic, responsive, reflective, and deliberate. By continuously aligning routines, boundaries, and values with evolving circumstances, you maintain integration and reinforce internal authority. An important aspect of sustaining self-love is mentoring or sharing insight ethically. Guiding others or contributing value from a position of alignment reinforces your own principles and practices. Ethical engagement in this manner consolidates self-respect and demonstrates that identity-based self-love is both internally grounded and externally constructive. Over time, mastery of self-love manifests in subtle but profound ways. Decisions are deliberate, not reactive. Interactions are authentic, not performative. Challenges are approached with composure and reflection. Goals are pursued with clarity and alignment rather than external comparison or validation seeking. Self-respect is steady, resilient, and integrated. It becomes less a practice and more a lived experience, a lens through which life is interpreted, understood, and engaged. Finally, mastery is sustained by the recognition that self-love is iterative, dynamic, and continuous. Even at advanced stages, reflection, practice, and deliberate action remain central. Old patterns may occasionally surface, challenges will always arise, and adaptation is required. What distinguishes mastery is not perfection, but consistent recalibration, ethical alignment, and internal authority. By committing to this lifelong process, you maintain self-love that is durable, integrated, and reflective of both ethical integrity and personal growth.
Through these practices, identity integration, daily routines, reflection, emotional regulation, boundary enforcement, selective engagement, and ethical interaction, you reach a state where self-love informs every choice, interaction, and aspiration. It becomes the stable foundation upon which all growth, decision-making, and ethical engagement are built. Mastery of self-love is neither ego nor indulgence. It is deliberate, disciplined, and ethical care for oneself, consistently applied across a lifetime. At this stage, loving yourself more than anyone else is no longer a technique. It is the default lens through which you experience life. External validation is supplementary. Comparison loses relevance. Decisions, actions, and interactions are filtered through ethical self-respect and alignment with principles. You respond to challenges with composure, pursue growth deliberately, and maintain clarity even under pressure. Self-love is identity, habit, and resilience, integrated fully, continuously, and ethically. And so, through practice, reflection, resilience, and deliberate alignment, you achieve mastery, not as a destination, but as a living, evolving process. Self-love becomes the foundation, compass, and anchor for a life of integrity, clarity, and ethical engagement. It is the lens through which all experiences are filtered, the internal authority from which every decision arises, and the subtle, steady force that shapes perception, behavior, and growth over a lifetime. As you sit with the ideas, practices, and reflections explored throughout this journey, it is worth pausing to consider what has truly been accomplished. Self-love is not a moment, an event, or a single realization. It is a sustained practice, a deliberate orientation toward yourself that integrates thought, behavior, and identity. The work you have undertaken is cumulative. Each reflection, boundary, habit, and act of resilience compounds, quietly reshaping the way you inhabit the world. The path to loving yourself more than anyone else begins with awareness. Noticing where your value has been dependent on external forces, where comparisons and expectations have undermined your clarity, and where internal narratives may have eroded your sense of worth, creates a foundation for change. Awareness is not judgment, it is observation. It provides the clarity needed to shift, adjust, and align. Every pause to reflect, every acknowledgement of internal authority, reinforces the internal narrative that you are worthy of respect, care, and attention. Through deliberate practice, this awareness transforms into action. Boundaries, selective engagement, journaling, mindfulness, and daily routines are not mere tasks, they are expressions of self-respect. They signal, first to yourself and then to the world, that your well-being and values matter. With consistency, these practices move from conscious effort to habitual expression. The internal authority they cultivate becomes a stabilizing force, allowing you to navigate life's complexities without losing sight of your worth. Challenges will inevitably arise, and they will test your alignment. Setbacks, criticism, and unforeseen events are part of the human experience. The difference between temporary fluctuation and erosion of self-respect lies in the resilience you have cultivated. Observing emotional responses, reframing difficulties as feedback, maintaining composure, and recovering through reflection strengthens internal authority. Resilience is the bridge between practice and mastery. It ensures that your sense of worth remains intact even under pressure. As you progress toward mastery, self-love becomes integrated into identity. It is no longer a set of actions or strategies. It is the lens through which you perceive yourself and the world. Decisions are guided by values, interactions reflect authenticity, and ambitions are pursued with deliberate alignment rather than comparison or validation seeking. Internal authority becomes the standard, and external influence, while observed and respected, no longer dictates your sense of worth. This integration is the hallmark of ethical, enduring self-love. Habits and routines
serve as both reinforcement and structure. The repeated, deliberate practices, reflection, journaling, boundary enforcement, emotional regulation, physical care, selective engagement, create a framework that stabilizes self-respect across diverse circumstances. The more consistently these practices are applied, the more automatic and resilient they become. Over time, self-love ceases to be effortful. It becomes the default lens through which life is navigated. Language and thought patterns remain foundational. Constructive self-talk, internal acknowledgement of effort and alignment, and reframing challenges as opportunities reinforce identity-based self-love. Neural pathways are strengthened, emotional regulation is supported, and internal authority is maintained. Words, even unspoken ones in your mind, are not merely descriptive, they are generative. They shape perception, influence action, and sustain the narrative of worth upon which all other practices depend. Self-love at this level is both personal and relational. Loving yourself more than anyone else does not require isolation or disregard for others. Rather, it allows ethical, authentic engagement. Relationships are approached from alignment and clarity, not neediness or compulsion. Boundaries are respected, communication is deliberate, and interactions are mutually constructive. In this way, self-love enhances both personal integrity and relational quality, creating conditions for authentic influence and collaboration without compromising values. Life, by nature, will always present pressures, changes, and uncertainties. Mastery of self-love does not shield you from circumstance, nor does it promise perfection. What it does provide is a stable foundation, a compass of internal authority and clarity. By sustaining ethical routines, practicing reflection, reinforcing values, and cultivating resilience, you create a life in which self-respect remains consistent, deliberate, and durable. External fluctuations may occur, but your internal lens remains steady, grounded in habit, identity, and ethical practice. It is also essential to recognize the iterative nature of self-love. Mastery is not a destination, it is an evolving practice. Life presents new challenges, opportunities, and environments. Consistent recalibration, reflection, and adjustment ensure that self-respect remains intact across these changes. The most profound aspect of mastery is understanding that self-love is a living, adaptive process, one that grows with experience, insight, and disciplined attention. The ultimate outcome of this journey is not ego, self-centeredness, or indulgence. It is clarity. It is freedom from undue reliance on external validation. It is ethical agency in every choice, action, and interaction. Loving yourself more than anyone else establishes a stable foundation for confidence, resilience, and authentic engagement with life. It equips you to navigate relationships, challenges, and ambitions from a position of integrity rather than compulsion or comparison. Remember that every step you take in reinforcing self-respect, every reflection, every habit, and every deliberate action compounds. Each choice to honor yourself increases the probability that subsequent actions will align with principles, values, and ethical self-love. This compounding effect is subtle but transformative, gradually reshaping perception, behavior, and experience into a consistent, authentic reflection of your worth. As you move forward, consider self-love as both shield and compass. It shields you from undue external pressure, corrosive comparison, and self-doubt. It guides decisions, interactions, and growth toward alignment, integrity, and deliberate action. It is both protective and generative, shaping a life that is ethical, empowered, and authentically yours. Finally, appreciate that self-love is both immediate and cumulative. Each conscious moment of alignment, each boundary maintained, each act of reflection and resilience contributes to a larger pattern. Over months and years, these choices coalesce into a durable internal authority. You begin to inhabit a life in which your worth is self-determined, your decisions are principled, and your presence is ethical, calm, and powerful. Loving yourself more than anyone else is not a goal. It is a practice,
a discipline, and ultimately an identity. It requires awareness, routine, reflection, resilience, and ethical integration. The process is iterative, the growth cumulative, and the result transformative. Your perception of yourself becomes steady, your choices deliberate, and your capacity for authentic engagement deepens. This is the living essence of self-love, quiet, unshakable, and profoundly empowering. And so, as this journey concludes, know that the principles and practices shared here are not temporary tools, they are frameworks for life. Integrate them, practice them, and return to them as needed. Let awareness guide action. Let reflection reinforce alignment. Let resilience sustain presence. Let identity anchor worth. In this manner, self-love becomes not only a practice, but the enduring foundation upon which a meaningful, ethical, and empowered life is built.